hello, and welcome to the third talk in our Farming for the Future podcast series. My name is Caroline Aitken, and I'm the Programme Development Lead for the new BSc in Regenerative Food and Farming at Schumacher College, which opens in September and is open for applications now. It's the first it's the first degree course of its kind in the country. So if you'd like to know more about that, we'll put some links in the chat. I'm delighted to be partnering this evening with Chelsea Green Publishers for this series, where we talk to some of their food and farming authors about their take on the future of food and farming. And the talks are taking place on the last Tuesday of each month. So we are this evening going to be hearing from Nancy J. Hayden and John P. Hayden about their experiences with farming and their new book, Farming on the Wild Side. And you will have an opportunity to ask some questions to Nancy and John, which you can post in the Q&A section. So at the bottom of your screen on the toolbar, you'll see the Q&A section. So if you open that up and you can put your questions into there, and we will pose them to Nancy and John later on in the session. So, so I would like to introduce Nancy and John. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
And you are zooming in from Maine this afternoon, I believe, but it's not. It's morning where you are.
Early afternoon.
Okay.
1 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've already had lunch. We're in good shape.
Oh, okay, right. I was adding more time than there was, wasn't I? Okay, great. So so it's not too early. That's good. Just by way of introduction then, Nancy and John. So Nancy is a writer, farmer, artist, and former environmental engineering professor. And John is an ecological farming researcher, farmer, teacher, and consultant. And they spent 25 years plus transforming a livestock farm into a diverse agroecological fruit farm and plant nursery, and actually have now moved on to a new project as well, and they're going to tell us all about that now. So over to you, Nancy and John.
Okay.
Okay. Slideshow.
There we go. Great. So we are going to be talking about farming and gardening on the wild side and what that means. As Caroline mentioned, we formerly of the Farm Between, which we had for 29 years in Vermont, and we recently moved to Waldoboro, Maine, and have started a new project, Northwind Gardens. So I'm going to start a little bit about the history and the farm, and then John is going to talk about some of our new projects. So in the early years, we started out as primarily livestock farmers and vegetable farmers. We wanted to create some new models in farming. We were disheartened by conventional agriculture and the use of pesticides and inhumane treatment of animals. So we decided to do our own thing. We had young children at the time, and we wanted them to learn to love the animals and understand where their food came from, as well as feeding them healthy, organic, pasture-raised food. There's a good quote. Once the Dalai Lama was asked, how do we teach compassion to our children? And he said, teach the children to love insects. So I think that really speaks to the ecological aspects of what we were trying to do as well. We're both ecologists in our early training, and we wanted to share our love of nature and our love of all the animals, including insects, with our children. And then through them, we had a lot of their classes come to the farm and the community. We did tours. We had a farm stand on the farm, and really share our love of ecology and nature with the community, wider community as well. As I mentioned, we had Vegetables, we were doing organic vegetables and doing a lot of the new practices in terms of cover cropping. Here you can see between the rows of tomatoes, I think that is. And we had tomatoes in hoop houses, and we're doing a lot of things that you do as a good organic farmer. But probably sort of midway through our adventures, we started having a lot more competition from younger organic farmers. And we had a winery opening up down the road, and John went and talked to him about growing black currants for them to make wine. And that in 2002, that black currant project was launched. And we fell in love with more perennial fruits. So we increased our black currant operation, red currants, gooseberries, and got into a lot of other types of fruits, expanding our operation. We put in an orchard and really made the move towards this perennial fruit farm. We also did a lot with value-added products. We could get higher prices for organic fruit, and we started making them be even more high value by taking our apples that weren't dessert quality, like you see in that picture, and turning them into ciders, into a sweeter cider, and then adding things like black currant juice or elderberry juice, raspberry juice to those ciders, and doing, people loved them. People loved having these organic, really wholesome ciders. And we were also doing fruit syrups and other types of things. And we got to this idea that maybe we could expand this business and be this big, fruit juice and fruit syrup tycoons. And we started getting all kinds of ideas. We'd kept it really small to date, and we started getting this idea of biggering the whole operation. We put in a grant to have our own commercial kitchen and do all this kinds of stuff. And luckily we didn't get the grant, and we were able to rethink what was really important in our operation. And we liked the small size. We liked being able to get out into the fields, and we didn't want to spend more time in the kitchen. We didn't want to hire a big crowd of people to do that type of work for us. So it really got us to rethink. I was starting to think about retirement from, I'd been working on a farm at the university, and we really needed to have some additional income. So we rethought what we love, and decided that we would start a fruit nursery and edible landscaping and pollinator friendly trees and shrubs. And a lot of these we could propagate our own. We could have people come to the farm, and we would help them do the things that we loved, which was gardening and growing our own food and growing it responsibly, and thinking about pollinators and all those kinds of things. So that worked out well, and I was able to retire, and this supported us for many years, the fruit, and then also selling the plants. And then a few years ago, we started writing a book, and we called it Farming on the Wild Side. And it's really about growing fruit, perennial plants, biodiversity, and resilience. And that was in some ways kind of, the culmination of our work, and our sharing of the love of the land and the plants and ecology. So people ask, what is Farming on the Wild Side? And this was the farm that we bought. It was an old dairy farm in 1992. The owners had gone out of business in the 80s. And they continued haying it and taking things off the farm without giving anything back. a lot of people look at this picture and they love the sort of bucolic New England farm scene, but really this is a biological desert. I mean, there's not a lot growing here. Even the grass, some of the grass was not necessarily great pasture. It was a lot of this reed canary grass, which isn't that nutritional for animals. And they hadn't really put anything back. They'd hayed, they ditched to get the water off as fast as they could. And, you know, this was what we had to start with, although the soils were generally good here when we started, but I think we improved them quite a bit. And this was the farm between, a couple years ago, but it still looks like this. So basically what we did is we got rid of our lawn there. We put in a small apple orchard. We have gooseberries growing behind those apple trees. We allowed the silver maple, some beech trees, and wild grape to come back along the stream edge, but we also planted a lot of things, high bush cranberry, witch hazels, and a lot of other native plants, and really allowed this riparian zone to come back as a native as a corridor for insects and animals and birds. And this is what we mean by farming on the wild side. So basically it's an ecosystems approach, and in an ecosystem, everything is connected, and including us, we're connected. And this bumblebee is a great example of, you know, they're not silent, but they are our silent partners. And they do so much of the work in terms of pollinating all the berry bushes and fruit trees and things like that, especially those black currants. I never saw any, even when we had honeybees, I never saw the honeybees on the black currants. It was always always the bumblebees. So, but bumblebees live all year long, all summer long, season long, and they need nectar and pollen resources. So planting a lot of plants, diversity, woody plants and trees that can support them throughout the season is important, as well as creating nooks and crannies for these queens to overwinter, and places where they can have colonies. So, you know, thinking about all of these things and how it's all connected is really important. Knowing that pesticides are going to affect our pollinators and a lot of other insects. So we never used any pesticides, and not even organically approved ones. We came up with some other ideas on how to deal with so-called pests. So this is an important idea of eco-literacy as well, and something that we've been working on our whole farming careers. This is a good overview of the farm in spring. You can see everything is green, and there's a couple spots. One spot in the middle that looks a little brown is just where the horses had been grazing. We did management intensive grazing all those years and continued with our horses. But it's a good comparison to look at sort of conventional agriculture across the street here, and corn and soybeans they typically grow, and they're going to till that up, disc that up every spring. And by doing that, you lose a lot of organic matter. The oxygen into the soil stimulates the bacteria, which then use the organic matter for food and release CO2. So that kind of farming, conventional farming, is really a contributor to our CO2 emissions. But it actually, on the reverse side, if we do more farming where we're no-till, and we're allowing in the soil to start accumulating organic matter, we can actually sequester carbon into the soil, into our woody plants, and really help reduce our carbon footprint. We also increase a lot of biodiversity on the farm. You can see the tree line here, all the riparian zone around the stream. That helps in enhancing wildlife habitat and cleaning the water and a variety of other things. So climate change and being more resilient was another added, or resilience was an added benefit of converting to the perennial fruits, because a lot of those can withstand this kind of flooding. Some of our fields that flooded during this, it was a 500-year flood, and it happened twice that year. So we can see that these forecasting probabilities of floods are really not any good anymore in times of climate change. So, but our fields that typically flood, even if it's not this severe, we converted to elderberries and aronia, which can handle flooding. They can actually handle heavy soils, and they're not very drought tolerant. So a couple years ago, we had a drought, and a lot of our elderberry plants did die back, but it didn't kill them totally. So they just had a bad year the following year, and then they came back. So that's the beauty of these woody shrubs and trees and stuff. They have a lot more ability to bounce back from droughts and from even a lot of rainfall than, say, the annual vegetables that we used to grow. The other thing that you'll note is, like, in the middle of the rows, they're all grassy now. There's no, if we think back on our neighbor's land where they had disked up, there's no bare ground. And in their case, that field often floods in the spring and washes away a lot of that soil into the river and eventually into lake, which can cause eutrophication and a variety of other problems. So having this covered with perennials as well as sort of a grassy walkway really helps protect that soil from any erosion. And you can do this type of no-till establishment on a large scale. This is how we planted another field of elderberry, basically out in what used to be an old pasture, and just digging holes and then using this woven landscape fabric. And you can actually have these like long staples and staple around the plant, so you can keep the weeds and keep the weeds away from the plant. And it also lets moisture and water and air in to the soil as well, while you're killing the grass that's under it, the sod, and turning that into organic matter, which is going to be soil organic matter, which is going to be beneficial for your plants. So we did this on large scales. We did this on small scale. You can roll up this landscape fabric and reuse it in other locations, which we would do, oftentimes rolling it up in the fall so that the voles and things wouldn't be living under there and cause some problems with your plantings. We also use a lot of cardboard and mulch, wood chip mulch and things like that to establish our new plantings. So wild spaces, that was one of the keys on the farm. It was a small farm, but we tried to keep a lot of places where somewhat wild meadows in between our alleys of our orchards and things like that, and allow a lot of the native plants to come back. This shows asters and Joe Pye weed and goldenrod and all these kinds of great plants which are good for the bees, but also are good for insectaries to allow different types of beneficial insects as well as some of the so-called pests to be here as well. And I'll explain that in a minute. So here's just a few examples of, this is a wasp parasitizing an aphid, and she's laying her eggs right inside the aphid that will grow and basically kill the aphid. So these types of beneficial parasites can live in these wild spaces, as well as these larger wasps. This was a wasp nest on a young pear tree, and the wasps are voracious predators, get a lot of the caterpillars and crickets and all kinds of other plant-eating insects. and they feed them to their young. So they are carnivores and can be really good beneficial insects on the farm. And you just have to avoid this limb of this tree for the season, and then they'll find a new spot next year. So our pest management philosophy is not this. This is conventional agriculture, where you would have your population of your pest, so-called pest down here, and then you'd have an outbreak, and then it would get to some level where you would need to come in and use your pesticide, kill the pest, but meanwhile most pesticides kill pretty much everything else as well. So all your predators and your parasitic wasp and all that stuff. And then usually, generally quickly, you're going to have another pest outbreak. And this time it may be even worse than the original one. And now you're on the pesticide roller coaster of using pesticides every time you have a pest outbreak. So that is not our pest management philosophy. Ours is to maintain, with all this biodiversity and these insectaries, we're trying to maintain this low level equilibrium of where you do have some pests, but because you have some pests, you also have the parasites, and you have the predators that can now sort of keep that level low. And then they tend to maintain that equilibrium. Although, occasionally you can have pest outbreaks, so it is, good to scout around. We do some mechanical removal of, current worm or something like that. John's reminding me of the time. So I do want to say a little thing about Japanese beetles, because that seems to be everybody's arch enemy. We have Japanese beetles, and this is wild roses that we planted around, so they tend to gravitate to them. That's a great trap plant. But if you also look at the thorax of this Japanese beetle, they have some eggs there, which are parasitic fly eggs, and those will hatch and go into the beetle and kill the beetle. So the other thing about Japanese beetles is they live as grubs in grass and turf and lawn. So by reducing your lawn, you can reduce the amount of grubs. By having trap plants, you can keep them out of by having a diversity of other plants, you can keep them out of your, some of your fruit trees and things like that. So that's kind of been our strategy. Oh, here's one of my favorite pests and allies. So the cedar wax wings, if you don't have your berries netted early in the season, like our honeyberries or even our red currants, these guys and gals will clean you out, and you will not get a berry because they don't share. But netting your berries and then opening them up at the end of the season, these birds will go in and clean up all the drops, and they will keep the pests down that way. But also when they nest in the summer, in July. So during the nesting period, they're out looking for high protein insects to feed to their young. So they can also be a good predator for a lot of the so-called pests in the garden. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to talk a little bit about Maine.
Okay, so not to rush you, we want to save plenty of time for discussion and questions. So yeah, in 2020, we were able to sell our farm, and we sold it to the publisher of our book, the Chelsea Green, the owner of Chelsea Green. And she is leasing it to Sterling College, who are using it as an agroecological satellite campus. So we're really happy that a lot of the work that we've put in there can be appreciated and is going to really good use training new people who are interested in regenerative agriculture. So yeah, so we moved to Maine and we bought this place on the coast, and the house was not in great shape. And we've been working on it. There's a picture of Nancy in the upper corner in her demolition mode. And so we spent a lot of time in the winter working on that. And if you look at this picture, you can see this is Nancy with her hands up in the air. This is our friend David from Riverberry Farm in Vermont who visited us. And this is me scratching my head trying to figure out what we're doing here. But we did do one thing. We got a load of compost. So, and we moved this shed that was here back to there. So we are on our way to developing this as a new spot for ourselves, taking a lot of the stuff that we learned from our previous farming experience and scaling it down and making it more manageable for us as we get older here. So we didn't really buy the place for the house, but we bought it for the location. This is actually right down our driveway and basically in our backyard in the Muscongas Bay. So we're really excited about learning about a new ecosystem and all the exploring of these beautiful waterways and tidal marshes and mudflats. And speaking of mudflats, on the right, we're learning how to clam. These are soft shells clams that make great steamers. And then also, when life gives you oaks, you make shiitake mushrooms. So we have a woodlot that has tons of oaks that needed to be thinned. So we're using them for firewood, but also we decided to start making a mushroom yard. So we're just trying to adapt to this new environment. But we are, our old selves, landlubbers, and we like growing things in the soil. This soil here, you can see, is very stony, first of all. And this topsoil had been scraped off to make a level spot for the house. So that's challenging. I was telling Nancy it's like digging on Mars to get anything going here. And maybe like Elon Musk would be interested in hiring us in the future when we start doing some agriculture on Mars. But anyway, so you can see it's a light soil, it's very sandy. So that's good because we can always add water if we need to. And so, but it's really a challenge to get life back into this because our basics for soil health and plant health is to get the biological activity going in the soil. One of our strategies was we needed a ditcher to bring some electricity out to a garage. So this trencher here, so we rented it for a morning, so we only needed it for a little while. So we did contour lines on this slope here with the ditcher to help slow the water down and run it as it runs off. And so the organic matter is life and the water is life. So those are the two things we want to bring to this soil. But when you have lousy soil, one of the first things you want to do is, and you don't have time to remediate it, is to make some raised beds. So we did do some raised beds and we populated them with greens for this year. So we had some nice salads. The other thing that was really important when coming to a new place is to find sources of organic matters that we can add to the soil. So over here, our next door neighbors have horses, and they're generously shared their horse manure with us, which is beautiful manure. And then we found a firewood processing place that had a lot of old wood chips and particles from their firewood processing, where they're splitting and stacking. And this is nice aged hardwood organic matter. So we got a lot of this going on with the shoveling and spreading and adding. And we're looking forward to seeing the results. Nancy talked about how we use plastic for no-till, but here's another way that we've been creating some no-till spots. The first thing we do is do a soil test. So our soil was very acidic, or like 5.5 pH. So we added lime, and then there's some compost down under here also. And then we go with the cardboard to smother the weeds. That's another important discovery we had to make, is where to find cardboard. So the local cooperative is a great source. I figured out their pickup day is Tuesday. So on Sundays or Mondays, I go over there to their dumpster and do some dumpster diving and fill up my truck with cardboard. And we can create these spaces. So it's cardboard, and then something to hold it down. So either wood chips, or in this case, I finished it with some leaves. That was we found a great source of leaves people around here are crazy in my mind. They rake up their leaves and they bag them up, and which is foreign idea to us. But looked at it as a resource. So we've got leaves, and then I threw some more compost just to keep the leaves from blowing down. So this was last spring. So this year I planted last fall. So this year we planted some sweet corn. I've got some sweet corn in here, and that in a few years this will be a nice veggie bed. And we did establish some perennials. This nice light soil seems to lend itself to asparagus. So we're focusing a little bit on asparagus for production. And this is how we use the plastic. This is the second year growth of this asparagus. The first year, the plastic was folded together like this right on the spears. And then this spring, we opened it up, so like a book. And so that gives us a weed-free zone. And probably next year, we'll open this one more flap, and then we'll be able to mulch the whole thing. And that should be good for getting the asparagus established. We laid out our garden paths and beds for just our herb and kitchen garden here. And we created a little sun temple for artwork. And here's Nancy earlier this spring being a sun worshiper. We've created a little vegetable garden. We did some terracing on that slope with some stones, and created a little vegetable garden. This was the original site of that, or the site of that original compost pile. So already the weeds had been killed there, and there was a lot of nutrients already that had probably leached into the ground. So around the edges, I had to do a little digging and digging up sod and things like that. And I remembered what back-breaking labor that is to start a garden using tillage ideas. So just reinforced my love of no-till. And this is taken by last week, and you can see we've made some progress. We've got some fruit trees in, and our cherries are flowering, and now we have little fruitlets on them. So we're really excited about both tart and sweet cherries. Sweet cherries will be new for us because we're in a warmer climate zone here, zone 5, when we were in zone 4 in Vermont. Rhubarb is established. These are raspberries. We have sea kale, which is one of our favorite perennial vegetables also. And then within the rows, we're planting more flowers and annual vegetables, cucumbers, and things like that. So we're having a great time here, and enjoying the scaled down approach, but also taking a year just to kind of figure out, we call it a year sabbatical, to figure out what our niche is going to be, what crops grow well, and what where there might be some potential markets in the future for some of our stuff. So with that, we wanted to talk for a half hour. Nancy took 2 extra minutes, and that was sort of perfect.
Brilliant. Very, very punctual. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. It was really fascinating little that was quite a sort of a high-speed charge through what was a really, long and complex journey. And one of the things that I love about the book is, it really, I mean, there's so many there's philosophical perspectives, there's practical guides, there's kind of, it really does walk you through every facet of your learning journey. And you did so many things, in actually a relatively short space of time, really, to have gone through so many different kinds of growing systems and enterprises. So I suppose, first of all, it's just incredibly impressive what you achieved there on the farm. And also, the book represents an incredible source of learning for people, because you tried so many different things, and you explain, the underlying principles of what you did, and the particular methods you used. So it's a really wonderful book.
Well, we do love learning. I think that's been the impetus for us for trying new things. And, we started out in livestock, and we did a lot of livestock, and we weren't doing great economically with that. So we said, well, let's try something else. We added the vegetables. We did a little better. Still, the economics weren't all that great. Then the fruit were really great, and for us economically, as well as, we just found kind of like, you got to find what you love to grow. And even like, people can't believe we left our beautiful farm in Vermont, and we have a lot of great friends and community there. But still, it's just something pushes us for more adventure and new learning and and new things. So I think that's how we landed here, is just the opportunity to get into a new landscape and observe and interact and learn. It's kind of addicting or something to me. I like the new, the new, trying new things and being a lifelong learner.
Absolutely. And now, as you said, you're in a new climate in a different part of the country. So you've got all of that contextual stuff to learn where you are now. And are you intending for this new farm to also be a commercial endeavor rather than just a sort of personal sufficiency?
I think.
Well, we kind of we're not answering that question yet. We decided that we were gonna, once we moved here last fall, and we were gonna like take a sabbatical and just kind of get things established, see what we like, see where there's opportunities here. I think we will end up selling some stuff from the farm. Some of, once these fruit trees get bigger, of course, we'll have a huge surplus. And, if we get our asparagus patch going, that might be nice for a local chef or something like that. I think we're trying to keep fairly open. We started these shiitake mushrooms. When they get going, we're going to have way too many shiitakes. So that's, again, looks like maybe a chef or, to the co-op or something like that. So I think there'll be, I think that'll happen in the future, but we're not so trying to plan everything. We're trying to keep more open.
Yeah, but that being said, we did overplant everything, and it's in my blood to grow and sell stuff. So I'm sure I'm already thinking about little chefs and little restaurants around and just places that might fit our new scale. But we're not going to do this for our livelihood. We're going to try to make a whole living, on the farming again. We're trying to relax more.
Trying to retire, maybe. Yeah. And reading the book, a lot of your journey seemed to have been not only that process that all agroecological farmers need to go through of observing and responding to the land and the soil and the climate and the wildlife, but also kind of observing and responding to your markets as well. And so for a lot of people that, small farms represent a great opportunity for diversity, the using agroecological methods, regenerative farming methods, but they can also pose quite a challenge in terms of making it add up and, making a decent income. And you tackle that in the book, and you talk through how you responded to those different situations. And you mentioned early on in the presentation about how, in a way, responding to the changes in the market helped to keep you, coming up with new ideas and finding new ways and new routes. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, how you kept the business viable and how you responded to markets.
I think the nice thing about being here is that we don't have to always keep the enterprise analysis in mind. So when I do an enterprise analysis, I'm keeping track of how much time I'm spending per crop, what the inputs are, how long it takes to harvest, what price we're getting, and do that all and figure out how much we're making per hour. So, some crops we could, do pretty well, $30, $45 an hour, others $15 an hour, but it's always going through my head. Here, like, that sweet corn I just planted, that's going to be priceless by the time I get that harvested, right? So that we've taken that worry off of us. But yeah, we were always, you can create a regenerative model and a biologically sound, ecologically sound model, but if it's not economically viable, then it's not a great model that people are going to be able to replicate.
Well, I would say that one of the things, the big advantage we had was John, because he likes to go out and talk to people. And there was a French chef, even like when we barely had any vegetables, we first started, he went out and talked to the French chef. He'd make up nice little basket for him to try. and sell, and sell to him. And then that led to another little restaurant, and then the local grocer. And so he was always, so when the people down the road were going to they start their winery, I mean, he knew about it before, they actually even started. So that's when they had the conversation about black currants, and, we can grow black currants for you and stuff like that. So, he's really been out there meeting people, chatting, never feels like, it's wasted to go out and find somebody or connect or whatever. And that's not my personality. So I can say that I think my personality would have been like, the horse in uh, the farm. What was the name of that? The
Animal Farm.
Animal Farm, right? The horse. I will work harder, right? Whereas he's always trying to find out new things and new ways and make innovations and stuff like that. So I think it's good to have two people
Yeah.
like that, because I could,
You want the workhorse.
yeah. And then it's nice to have somebody who's out marketing and getting, talking to more people, and I'm out there, weeding or at the nursery selling stuff or whatever. So
But
Yeah.
you do see like a lot of young people starting out, and this model of 1 to 2 acres of vegetable growing, it's a grind. It's brutal, and it's great for young people who have all this energy and can work 80 hours a week and get it done. But I think you got to get smarter, or you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again, or you're going to burn out.
right.
So you have
And
to
that's why the fruit, I mean, the fruit, and there's a high capital cost, but it's one of the things that it's like, yeah, if you have a couple acres, figure out where you're going to start putting some fruit, because that can really be a much more, lucrative business. And yeah, there's a lot of weeding and mulching in the beginning, um, every season, but it's not the same as a vegetable, the annual vegetables and stuff like that. So
It doesn't have the same urgency. So vegetables, you have a community supported agriculture scheme, and people need to come once a week, and you've got to get your radishes planted and get everything all set and then weeded, and so that they can grow. And if it doesn't rain, you get behind, and it's just like very stressful. Fruit, if you have diversity is really important too. If I was just growing apples and we had a frost, during bloom, then that would be devastating. But if you have a bunch of other crops to fall back on, it's not that big a deal if you lose half your apple crop for that year. So I think the diversity is important, but you got to find the balance of what your workload management is. So it's tricky, and it takes a lot of just trial and error. We call it, the school of hard knocks, of just learning, but also being aware enough of like, this is a bad idea, and not married to it, and be able to move on,
Yeah, and I guess that's the advantage, isn't it, of not only working on a smaller scale, but also having sort of multiple things, products coming out of the farm at any given time. You're not putting all of your eggs into one basket, because you might have some fruit going here and some veg going here and some livestock, and so it really all comes down to the resilience of diversity again, doesn't it? And in a way, there's a lovely parallel, I think, between the way that the benefits of diversity on the farm, and the sort of the networking and the all of the what you did, John, with going out and talking to people and meeting people, and sort of making the relationships within your community that are similar to that of the ecosystem on your farm, aren't they? So making those connections, forming the relationships, and then you have that resilience, a sort of social resilience there too.
Yeah, I think the diversity of markets is really important too. So you might have enough to take care of where you go to the farmer's market to sell, but then you might have a lot of excess. So then you can call the cider maker and say, hey, I've got tons of aronia berries. How about making an aronia cider? And so that diversity is also stabilizing. In ecosystems, diversity gives you stability. Diverse markets also give you stability.
Yeah, and if we are wanting to sort of diversify the kind of foods that we're growing and the kind of foods that we're eating, that can be quite a sort of a mental leap, if you like, or a sort of a challenge to the food citizen, as it were, in terms of sort of dealing with foods they're not so familiar with. you know, so you were talking in the book, you know, you really fell in love with the unusual fruits. And that gives you, you know, you have a diverse range of fruits, which is wonderful. But then you have to try and convince people to try those things. And yeah, and so I guess the skills in going out and having those conversations and winning people over and saying, well, give it a try, see what you think, are really important too.
That's where, like, dealing with chefs and things, or people, or the winery or something like that. I mean, they were really interested in the unusual fruits, right? The beer makers and things like that. So having those kinds of connections, whereas, you know, at the farmer's market, when we had the black currants looked beautiful on our table, most everybody would walk by, except for, it was interesting, over time, people like the English or the Germans or the Russians that were in, you know, in the area started migrating to the stand to find, you know, these fruits, because they did love them. So but yeah, I think restaurants and chefs and stuff can be a great source for some of these unusual fruits and vegetables.
And let's hope then, you know, because I've heard that a lot from farmers here as well, that the restaurants are really keen for unusual things. So let's hope then that that sort of trickles down in you know, into our culture, and people become more adventurous. Yeah. So and I guess also you know you're selling directly to your local community as well, aren't you? Even if that community is the chef who is then, you know, cooking for the restaurant. And so those direct sales models can be really helpful for people farming on smaller scales. And obviously that can look like community supported agriculture and box schemes and things like that. But you also did one of the other big kind of strategies for smaller farmers is the adding of value to their produce. And so you did that with the drinks, the fruit syrups and that kind of thing. And so what was your main market for the syrups?
You want to talk about the snow cones?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so, well, we came up with this idea to make snow cones. I don't know if in the UK, if you have something like that. It's shaved ice with, what do you call them?
Slushies.
Oh, slushies. Okay, yeah. So I read an article in the New York Times about the different names and different traditions around the US for these things, like snowballs in Maryland and New Orleans. And I said, well, shaved ice in Hawaii. I said, well, you know, Vermont needs something like that. So I found a hand crank ice shave machine, and we perfected some syrup recipes to pour over them. And we brought those to the farmer's market, and that pretty much floated the farm for quite a few years. So that was a big hit. We'd have a line, you know, we could sell like 350 of those on a hot Saturday, and you know, go home.
And people
tired.
would then buy this. We'd have bottles of the syrup, so then they would buy them too. I mean, because we were small scale, there was some ways to kind of skirt under some of the rules with all the, you know, having commercial kitchens and everything. But because of that, we couldn't really sell to you know, restaurants. We couldn't sell to stores. We would have had to do the commercial kitchen idea, which is what we were going to what we wrote that grant for. But yeah, I mean, so we basically could sell at the farmer's market, I think, because of the snow cones. It was easy to give people a try too. Put it on a little thing of ice and give them a try of the black currant, and they were just crazy about it. You know?
I think that's one of our legacies is, you know, here in the US, people never heard of black currants. And we love, my mother was Irish, and we had them when we lived in England for a little while. And yeah, so that was our legacies. We really exposed people to this idea of black currants.
Yeah.
And now people are growing. There's several black currant farms and wineries, and the beer people are using it. And so,
wow, that's great, because they do. I mean, they grow so brilliantly, don't they? Black currants. You know, they're easy to grow and manage, and great harvests from them.
Yeah, that's why we chose them. We grew a few for a few years and said, there's no pests, and they're growing great. We didn't like them when first we eat them. It's these things are horrible.
Took us a few years, and now it's like I overeat them during the season because I'm just eating and picking at the same time. So yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, that's big thing, is like leaving all these, you know, fields and all this fresh fruit and gooseberries and all kinds of things like that, and moving to a state that doesn't allow gooseberries or black currants because of the white pine industry here. So that's not allowed. So we had to, like, we're planning our trip back to Vermont when they're, you know, in season, so we can get some.
Wow, so you can fill up on berries. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Well, look, I've just seen that we have quite a few questions here actually. So I will just see what we've got. So so some of these I can see people's names and sometimes I can't. This one is from AZ. Would you start up the tree nursery again? What are the components of Vermont that you would do again in Maine?
I think the tree nursery was one of the things that made us really tired. I think we did well, especially we were buying in some trees and potting bare root trees and selling those. But the things that we were propagating ourselves were very profitable. And then the other ones were more like break even or lost leaders, just to have a full range of plants for people to be able to come by. But I mean, so the idea is.
I liked the nursery.
Yeah, she loved the nursery.
Because I felt like I mean, it was sometimes, you know, the doorbell or the driveway dinger would ding, and you know, I'd be in the house and I'd, you know, kind of, but once I was out there talking to people, and I felt like this is probably the best thing I've ever done, is encouraging people to grow their own fruit and food, and helping them, you know, do things right. So in making it easy for them so they don't get discouraged, and, you know, young people that would come in. I mean, I just felt like that was the best work I ever did. So I mean, it was hard, and the last year we did it with COVID was absolutely insane, because people were buying, like, we just had it online and they were going bonkers, and we had no, like, we were small. So, you know, I had no good inventory management. I was out there all the time counting things. Do we have things left? And people are, you know, we sold everything within about 3 weeks that normally we would take, you know, we'd sell half of it in the spring, and then, you know, the rest during the season. We sold everything. We were sold out on Mother's Day. It was absolutely insane.
Wow.
So then I was glad to be done. Actually, it was a good way to finish it. It was so crazy, so stressful. But otherwise, it was just a very, yeah, I mean, I think the nursery would be something that, you know, not at our age now, but something that I think is great, and it's great to learn. You learn tons about the plants, and you're sharing it with people. You're having great conversations.
There's miracles going on all the time when you probably split something or you graft onto a rootstock, or it's just like right in front of your eyes is
yeah, I thought
miracles.
It was miracles. That was really, really great. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, there's nothing more satisfying than that kind of propagation. You know, when you have your stock plant and then suddenly you've got all these little pots of babies and off they go. Yeah. Okay. So I've got one here. What would you recommend for converting a grass lawn to annual/perennial garden beds in the spring? Is it best to prepare beds in the fall with cardboard and mulch, leaf, compost layers? Would you recommend any form of tilling of the grass in the spring? Okay, quite a practical question.
Yeah, very great question. And yeah, so to kill a lawn, it generally takes a whole season, I think. Okay, so you would want to be able to smother the weeds for the whole season. So you know, those pictures I showed where we laid the cardboard and put the leaves on, that's going to take a whole year before that's totally effective. But in the meantime, while you're waiting, you could do your cardboarding in the fall and your mulching. And then what I did with my sweet corn I was talking about is I went out and made little holes, and I've transplanted into those little holes in the no-till area. So you can, you know, have like a combination of that. If you want to direct seed and you want to have a nice seed bed, then you can cut a little V notch into your cardboard and stuff and create a little seed bed there. the spaces between your rows are still going to be covered and no-tilled, and then you just have a small little area to hand weed. So yeah, you can do it.
We did plant last fall into the lawn, and then with some perennials that we brought with us, and then we cardboarded around everything, and with the wood, and put the wood chips on. And then this spring, it hasn't been a full year, so what we've done, dug some more holes, and every time we dig a hole, that sod is still in pretty good shape, so you got to shake it out and then just try to put your new plant in that little hole. And it seems to be working okay, but a lot of we need to do some improvement and things like that. But we're anxious, we're excited. If you can wait a full year, then it's best to wait a full year. But if you can't, you can make little pockets of little places and get things started, because that's part of the fun. It's hard to do everything at once. You want to just kind of get started slowly doing stuff and then adding every year.
I get excited about somebody asking about killing their lawn, because I think that's one of the greatest thing you can do for humankind and for the earth is kill those stupid lawns. we blame the British often for these big expansive lawns and little mansions and stuff.
I know, but in the UK we have this very wet climate, and it's not hard to keep a lawn green. It's very, very rare in the UK that anybody would need to water their lawn. I mean, I'm sure people do, but in other parts of the world you see these sort of luminous green manicured lawns which are being irrigated regularly through the year just to keep them. It's all a bit crazy. Okay, so another one here from Rob, which says, hi, we have 3 acres in North Devon which we've been developing for 25 years. Very ecologically diverse, much like yours, but we're sometimes challenged by climate change extremes. How are you adapting? It's quite a big question.
I mean, I think, the drought was, we had the floods. I show the picture of that. And again, the perennial elderberries and things like that in these wetter areas were a great thing to plant there. Aronia is another one for us. So that really helped. Having a lot of mulch and organic matter and things on your perennial plants can really help keep the moisture in when it's a dry season. And we did have a drought a couple years ago, and as I said, it did hurt that elderberries, and it seemed to even hurt some of the black currants, but it doesn't kill them. It hurts them so that the next year they might not produce as much fruit. But if it becomes a regular thing, we did a little bit of rainwater catchment to use around around the nursery and things like that. But that's an idea, or some kind of irrigation might be needed, right?
I go back to diversity of crops also, so that if we have a unusual cold spell, we get these Arctic vortices where the stream of really cold air comes down, and can happen during bloom for some of our perennials, is to have things that are flowering early, things that are flowering late. And again, just having that organic matter in the soil to hold the moisture. We like hoop houses for environmental control too. That was one of I didn't show any pictures, but I did build a little hoop house here that we have our tomatoes in case we do get a lot of rain, that we can shed the moisture, and we can drop the sides for frost management and for temperature management. So yeah, it's a struggle. The climate change is real, and it's affecting farmers a lot, and it's a struggle. So we don't have any easy answers to that.
But again, so often in sort of ecological agriculture, the answer tends to come down to soil health, healthy soil, good soil structure, and diversity, which I think, for that, the kind of resilience you need to deal with those extremes, you can't go far wrong with those two, really. So I have another one from Evangelos, who asks, do you have any tips for keeping deer from nibbling fruit trees? It's a good one.
And I didn't show those pictures, but we had to use 5-foot welded wire fencing, and we would just do it around the tree. And those are easy to take off, weed and mulch in the spring and put back on. And they would have to be, because we had ours, if you remember that one picture, we were way out in this old meadow area, pasture area, and there were plenty of deer out there. So every tree had a fence on it. But the way we planted that orchard was, we did like 3 rows, and then the next year we added some rows and added some rows. So by the time, the newer trees were coming in, we could take them off some of the earlier trees. And so we're always moving them around. Once they got tall enough for that it wasn't going to kill the tree, they could still browse the lower ends. But yeah, so I mean, little fences. And then we'd have to keep the voles too. So we'd use a little on the trunk of the tree, some screening, hardware cloth or just regular screening to keep them from eating those in the early spring when they.
Yeah, fruit tree is an investment, so it's important, I think, to invest in the right protection for it, not just throw it out there and hope it survives.
And it's often the way, isn't it, when you're not using, pesticides and things, also on the kind of vegetable crops as well. It's a case of sort of using crop protection at key times, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, is key times, right? Understand when you need things and when you don't. Same with the netting and things like that. We'd reuse netting, take it off the early ones, put the netting on the next things that were getting ready. So it wasn't like we had to have tons and tons of stuff. We could just, like, even the landscape fabric, we could roll up and, okay, let's move it on to this area because that needs some weed control and things like that. So
absolutely. Well, it looks like we have reached time, and I feel that we could go on talking for hours. It's, drawing from your experience, and I would really recommend the Farming on the Wild Side. It's a great book, and there's so much in there, for new farmers especially to learn from, and also not so new farmers. So thank you for joining us this evening. It's been really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've been a lovely host, and it's great to connect with our people across the pond there.
Yeah, and I think a few from further afield as well, by the look of it. So yeah, great. Thank you very much, Nancy and Joanne, and thank you to everybody else for joining us. Just to remind people that tonight was a free event, but we're grateful for any donations that you might like to give, and there's a link in the chat to do that. And so we will have another of these events at the end of next month, where we'll be talking to Nicolette Hahn-Niemann, who was an environmental lawyer turned vegetarian lawyer turned cattle rancher. So that's going to be a really interesting one as well. And just to say again that if you'd like to know more about our new undergraduate course, the BSc Regenerative Food and Farming, you can find information on our website, and there's links again in the chat. And I hope that you can join us next time. Thanks very much, everyone.